Morning, everybody. I hope you had a wonderful morning. I enjoyed that the sea was a little less rough today. So I trust the same for you. And I'm gonna talk about volcanic resources today and the use of volcanic products. And this is a very important lecture to me because volcanoes suffer from a bad reputation. And I actually think it's not quite right that we look at volcanoes in this way. I think actually volcanoes are really amazing, and I'll try to convince you of that today. So let's plunge into that. And as I said, volcanoes have a bad reputation, they have bad street cred, and this is because they erupt. And when they erupt, they cause damage. But we must be very careful because usually when volcanoes cause damage, it's partly because we put ourselves in their way. So if a volcano starts to rumble and have earthquakes and smokes away, maybe it's not a good place to be, and we must realize that. So when you then think of infrastructure like roads on Hawaii or villages on the flanks of Etna, here's a few impressions, then we have put infrastructure in the way. The volcano is much mightier than us, so actually we are the ones to blame, I think. And here is one of the first major eruptions I was involved in, 2006 at Merapi, the village of Kaliatem, which was entirely wiped out. Luckily, everybody was evacuated at the time, but the village is only 6 kilometers away from the peak of the volcano. So, if you choose to live there, then this is an issue. But besides all that, and I'll talk more about volcanic hazards in another lecture, but today I'd like to focus on the good sides of volcanoes. Volcanoes have two faces. I've just shown the bad one, now the good one. So here's one definition, and I promise there is only one in the entire presentation. So volcanoes and their underlying magmatic processes are the principal agents of redistributing materials within planet Earth. So if you have anything coming from the interior of the planet to the surface, it's done by volcanoes. There's no other way. So therefore, they are a key feature in understanding the localized concentrations of most of our resources, including metals, minerals, and also geothermal fluids, for example, and therefore they affect us in our daily lives. So this is what I want to kind of discuss with you, and let's start with this here. Most metals that we use, and we use vast amounts of metals, they come from volcanoes. This ship is built of steel. This comes from a volcano. And here is a big mine in northern Sweden where I live, and here are some of my students looking at the mine, and you will say, oh, Sweden and metals, yes, but Sweden and volcanoes? No, it's not entirely true. All of these rocks in Sweden that host the metals are volcanic in origin, but they're very old volcanoes, 2,000 million year old volcanoes. So, and here we have a beautiful specimen of copper, gold, and silver, and all of this comes from volcanoes. The Spanish Empire was so rich because they harvested silver and gold from the Andean volcanoes in South America. So when you think of all these metals here, and there's a range of rare metals that we are now using for modern technology, but steel is made of iron, and iron and copper is something we are in touch with every day. So new metals that become important now, well, they're not new, they're just new in our industry. And here, one of the most important metals we will need soon is cobalt. We'll need cobalt for batteries. And we have very little cobalt. 65% of cobalt comes from one country at the moment, and that's Congo. And the conditions are not quite optimal there. So the European Union is looking for other sources of cobalt. And I'm showing you this rock specimen here. Let's see if I get this to work. Oops. This rock specimen here, and see that dark crust on top of this tufaceous, this lapilli-rich, that's a volcanic term, means little stone rock. This lapilli-rich rock is a crust of cobalt and manganese, and that forms on the sea floor. This is actually from the Canary Islands, and it's on the flanks of the volcanic islands that we get these crusts. And this is something that we're now looking for because it's actually quite easily retrieved and it's only at the surface. It doesn't go very deep. So this forms round about the Canary Islands as we speak, and it has done so for many million years. So this is cobalt. And the other source of cobalt is actually meteorites, and this is why Elon Musk is interested in space exploration and space mining. So this submarine material is a lot closer than meteorites, and therefore we are exploring this right now. Another major resource coming from volcanoes is gemstones. And if you have a diamond, for example, somewhere on you, it's volcanic, I promise you. It's come via volcano. And the volcanic rocks, for example, in South Africa, they are bringing diamonds up from deep inside the earth. And then, of course, we polish them and cut them and make them look really, really shiny. Now, there is by now several semi-legal and industrial laboratories that can grow diamonds in the laboratory. But they're not quite the same. They're not the same as volcanic diamonds because they lack inclusions. So a specialist can tell them apart. Artificial diamonds are too clean, and therefore they usually don't come with color variations. If you have a pink diamond or something like this, it certainly comes from volcanic components that are added to the diamond. So then I should point out another major resource that comes directly from the rocks is obsidian. Obsidian is volcanic glass, and it breaks in a very sharp fashion, and people have used it for literally thousands of years as a cutting tool, and some surgeons use it to this day because when obsidian breaks, it breaks down to a single atom. You cannot sharpen a knife, a blade, that sharply. So if you make a cut with an obsidian, the wound heals very efficiently. And this is why some surgeons prefer obsidian as a tool to this day. So here's some examples, obsidian from Turkey, and this is actually tools from the 5th millennium BC, so it's 7,000 years old, and then also the Mayas used it, for example, but also other cultures, the Maori in New Zealand, on Hawaii, etc. And I just came across this very recently. This is the oldest recorded mirror that we have. It's actually volcanic obsidian that was polished, and it's dating to about 8,000 years before present. So, but then we also use pumice, for example, pumice stone as abrasion material. We use it in industry, and we abrade all sorts of surfaces with that. And it's a very highly porous volcanic glass, and it produces very sharp little edges when you break it, and that's very good for abrading material. And you can abrade industrial products, but you can also abrade, well, other parts. Exfoliation of your skin is very popular, and many of these products actually contain pumice stone. And maybe it's a little small to see, but if you focus in here, down here, it says volcanic pumice stone. And this one here as well, with pumice foot scrub. So you get all these products. So actually, if you use any of those, you're touching volcano. Well, literally, with your skin. And if you're using whitening toothpaste, there's a fair chance there's pumice in there as well. It's used to actually abrade the outer surface of your teeth, and therefore it removes all the coffee stain and tea stains and things like that. When I was young, there was a new fashion coming up, and it was prior to that, all the blue jeans were really dark blue, but when I was young, stonewashed jeans would come up. And well, now I look back and I think, what a silly concept to ruin your jeans before you actually wear them. But, well, it was really cool back then. And I never quite understood the concept until I looked into that. Stone-washed means they are tumbled together with pumice stone. And that's what's taking out the color and actually abrades them in certain places. So stone-washed jeans, I've also seen volcano at some point. White gold. You're probably all familiar with the concept of white gold. The Chinese were really good at producing porcelain china, but the Europeans were a little slow there. It took them many hundred years to actually get the recipe right. But white gold is made of 3 minerals: feldspar, quartz, and clay minerals. and they usually form in altered, in weathered volcanic rock. You need granite type rock. This is a rock that forms under the volcano. So these ingredients, they come from volcanoes as well. And it's been a huge revolution to use porcelain, because imagine you eat from wooden plates. Well, it's not so hygienic after the third use. And if you use porcelain, you can wash it off, and nothing sticks to it. And of course, also in medical application, this has revolutionized the way we live, and actually is partly responsible for our population growing so rapidly at the moment. So, but here, another important thing, you can use it for good or bad, of course, as so often, and that is dynamite. It's made of gunpowder, and it uses charcoal, potassium nitrate, and sulfur. And sulfur traditionally came from volcanoes. Nowadays, we use sulfur that is produced as a byproduct from petroleum refineries. So when we go off fossil fuels, then actually we will have another problem resulting from that is we have too little sulfur. We might need to go back to mine volcanic sulfur, in fact. And sulfur has been mined in many places. The peak of Teide volcano was mined in the Spanish Civil War for sulfur, because gunpowder was needed. But of course, being from Sweden, Mr. Nobel, he introduced the concept of dynamite to do good things. But, well, it didn't quite work so well, because obviously people use it for all sorts of applications. Another aspect of sulfur is it's used as skincare products. Particularly in Asia, it's very popular because it's clearing your skin. And many of the spas close to volcanoes that promise that they have healing waters, it actually comes from high sulfur content. So, and of course, we have geothermal power, and this is becoming more and more important, particularly in parts of the world where we have volcanoes. And here I'm showing the Wairaki power plant in New Zealand, which is one of the pioneering ones. And here the idea is that we are pumping in cold water into the volcano, just a little bit, not too much. And then the water heats up and it converts to steam. When water converts to steam, it increases in volume dramatically. And then it's pushing itself up, and you can actually produce electric energy from that. And in places with loads of volcanoes like Iceland, like Indonesia, like the Philippines, this is becoming increasingly applied, and hopefully this will help with our energy demands in the future. So it's a clean form of energy, clean in the sense that nature produces the heat and the gases anyway, but we can convert some of this into energy by converting water to steam. So here's some examples from Indonesia, and here's some from Iceland. And believe it or not, in Iceland, the Blue Lagoon, the most popular tourist site in all of the country, is actually the wastewater of a geothermal power plant. So, and here, just from Iceland, a few statistics. So geothermal energy produces a lot of electricity, as you can see here. It's also used for district heating, and it's also produced for greenhouses. And in fact, the biggest banana producing country in all of Scandinavia is actually Iceland, believe it or not, because of all the greenhouses. And the Blue Lagoon is also famous for its skincare products, I should stress. And here is the Blue Lagoon shop. And this is volcanic mud from the geothermal waters. And again, it clears your skin because it's got all the right salts and ingredients. So, having talked about volcanic salts, I should also mention salars. These are these big salt lakes in South America, in the Andes, in this triangle between Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. And there we have these lakes that dry out, and this is not snow I'm showing here, this is salts, and these salts are very rich in certain elements like lithium and boron. And lithium is one of those battery elements again, and we have far too little of it right now. So there is huge efforts to mine these salars now. It comes with some environmental problems because it actually reduces the groundwater level, but otherwise it's not environmentally too impactful. So there's big hopes that the salars, the volcanic salars of South America will help us enormously with making batteries and electric cars in the years to come. So here I'm just showing this, and these tiny little white specks in the lake, this is actually flamingos. And flamingos, they love salars. because they love the little shrimps in the salars, and they like them especially salty. So here you go. Apparently, the more shrimps they eat, the more pink the flamingos get. So if you see these pictures of nice pink flamingos, then you know Volcano was involved again. Let me talk a little bit about volcanic rocks now. And this is actually Cenubio de Valaron. I mentioned it yesterday. This is a site where Aboriginal people were likely storing grain on Gran Canaria. We'll visit there in a few days if you're interested. It's not too far away from the port. And there we have these cavernous weathering patterns, and people exploited this. And of course, people were carving into the big rock formations there because Pomish's rock is very soft. You can carve very easily. And here's Cueva del Rey on the left, which was the king's cave. It's quite spacious inside. And on the right-hand side, we actually have a cave restaurant. It's very nice and cool on a sunny day, so I recommend it. This is, of course, one of the most famous cave sites or living cave sites in the world. This is actually in Cappadocia in Turkey, but you see similar things in the Canaries and in many volcanic regions, in fact. But not only have we dug into caves or into volcanic rock, we also use volcanic rock as strategic outposts. Very frequently, when we find prominent buildings being high up on a hill, they actually sit on volcanic rock. So here's just a few examples. Mont Saint-Michel in France is on a volcanic intrusion. It's a very weathering resistant rock. So the Regensburg in Austria or Edinburgh Castle, they all sit on volcanic rock. But this is not only a feature in Europe, this is throughout the world. Here, Indonesia, this is near Merapi volcano, one of the really nasty volcanoes. It erupts almost consistently or permanently, and a lot of people living surrounding the volcano. But there's also a lot of culture surrounding the volcano. The biggest Buddhist temple in the world, Borobudur, is there. There's also a Hinduist temple close by, Prambanan, and all of them are built of volcanic rock and of solid volcanic rock. These are amazing structures. People must have spent huge amounts of time in manufacturing the elements for that, but these are built of these volcanic rocks. So volcanic rocks as a building stone is very important. And of course, this is something that the Romans exploited very early on. They even managed to actually make the first known cement, the Bozzolana cement, which is a mixture of reactive volcanic stone, and it starts when it solidifies to bind things together. And here's the Pantheon in Rome, and well, this is 2,000 years old, and it's still standing. Can you believe that? So amazing properties that volcanic rocks display. If you go to the Canaries, you will find many little churches, some bigger ones. They're, of course, also made of volcanic rock. Here's one of the famous ones in Arico village in Tenerife. And this is made of red volcanic stone. And the volcanic stone is very sturdy, but it also has tiny micro bubbles. So it's not as dense as massive rocks, so you can actually build taller structures because the weight is not quite so high. So, and this is something that you find in many volcanic regions. I spent some time in France during my times as a younger researcher, and there is an image of the cathedral in Clermont-Ferrand in the Auvergne, and that is, of course, also made of volcanic rock. Having said this, we are not only building things with volcanic rock, we're also preparing food with volcanic rock. Many of the millstones have been of volcanic origin. I've visited Mexico a few years ago. They still cut millstones from volcanic rock at Popocatépetl for a volcano, for example. And the Romans already used millstones that were produced in volcanic areas, and they traded them off to Scandinavia. The Vikings, for example, they bought millstones from the south of Europe. And, well, if you look at the archaeology, their teeth weren't quite so good. So partly because the millstones weren't up to scratch, so the Vikings always got the bad products. So then, of course, if you're in your kitchen, then you might actually have cladding stones on buildings or kitchen tops that are made of volcanic rock, nicely polished. This is usually rocks that form under the volcano, and they're easy to clean. They're non-reactive with acids, or at least with what we use in the kitchen. So, and therefore, this is actually also a very hygienic thing. Having said this, we use vast amount of aggregates, and I cannot stress that enough. Each of us uses over our lives probably close to 50 to 100 tons of aggregates. And this is material that we add to concrete, add to tarmac. And this is actually the resource we use the most, sand and aggregates. We all use, on average, vast quantities of it. So, and here on the top, I'm showing a quarry where material is mined. This is in Indonesia. It's a fresh volcanic deposit, and they're mining this for aggregates. And if you think of Las Palmas, the city of Las Palmas here, the beautiful houses there, well, these are made of concrete. I promise you about 40% of this material is actually volcanic rock aggregates that have been added to the concrete. So here's just a few impressions, and the Indonesians are actually quite nifty, I should stress that. You look at this and you think, oh my God, this is a bit random what they're doing. And look at all the little excavations there. But it's done with a purpose, can you believe it? Because they're actually doing this so that the next lava flow will have a rough bottom surface. So they're slowing down the lava flow this way. So they're purposefully creating what we call a sediment trap by mining it in an irregular fashion, creating friction at the base of a new eruption. So, but having talked about this, I also like to talk a little bit more about agriculture and gardening now. And this is something that is very, very important in the Canary Islands, but also in other areas. So a lot of very good wine is grown on volcanic soil. Here's a few examples from Sicily, Etna, from the Auvergne in France, and of course also here in the Canaries. If you go to Indonesia once more and you have a lot of rain, a tropical climate and volcanic soil, things are ideal for agriculture. So here, a stormy day in Indonesia during the rainy season, and you see how much water is there, and there you can grow rice in large areas, but you also grow a lot of spices. And the spice islands in Indonesia, they are named because we can grow all of these amazing things there, because all the conditions are perfect there. Volcanic soil, heat, tropical heat, and a lot of moisture. So, coffee. Well, I can't live without coffee, and I have coffee every morning, and coffee, 75% of coffee is grown also on volcanic soil. If you have coffee, it's likely grown on volcanic soil. And here is a little map, and the dark blue colors on the map are the countries that drink a lot of coffee, and the light colors, the sandy colors, are the countries that don't drink a lot of coffee. And you see Scandinavia, where I'm based, is dark blue. We drink a lot of coffee. And I think it's because coffee captures sunshine and warmth and volcanic energy. So it's very popular in the north of Europe, certainly. So here's a few impressions. Coffee beans in a coffee plantation in Indonesia. And they also have a few taller trees. The taller trees give shade to the coffee plants. And once you harvest the coffee beans, they're white. You have to roast them. And once you roast them, they look like this, and then you grind them up, and that's obviously the coffee we consume. Actually, I'll have a sip of coffee right now. So, but it's not only coffee. If you've been to the square this morning, there is, of course, a beautiful display of sweets, and there is actually chocolate lava cookies today. Have a go if you like, because chocolate is also actually produced on volcanic soils. And the images here of the cocoa beans there, they're actually also from Indonesia, from the Merapi volcano, where there's large plantations where cocoa beans are produced. So, and a few years ago, I had the pleasure of going to Hawaii. And, well, it says here, tropical treasures of Hawaii. And if you go to the Dole plantation, where they grow all the pineapples, there's a big display there where it says, oh, it's only possible because of one magic ingredient. And that's the volcanic soil again. See that red soil here at the plantation? That is volcanic soil. And that allows, together with heat and water, to grow all these wonderful fruits. Tea. It's not quite as intense as coffee. About 40 to 50% of all tea is grown on volcanic soil. So if you prefer tea over coffee, then yeah, you likely have a good chance of touching Volcano as well. Have you seen this plant before? Anyone any idea? It's not a very popular plant these days. When I was young, it was still kind of a thing. This is tobacco. So, and as you know, tobacco grows also in certain conditions, particularly in warm conditions. And here in the Canaries, tobacco has been grown for a long time. Winston Churchill got his cigars from La Palma. And this is no longer quite as fashionable these days, but for celebrations, it's probably okay every now and then. And tobacco is actually increasingly used to produce pesticides, natural pesticides, because the nicotine is actually bad for insects. This is why the plant developed the strategy to produce nicotine in the first place. So there is more and more tobacco plantations again, but not actually for smoking the tobacco, but for other things. Yet, as I said, tobacco is grown in many volcanic regions. So when I was on Hawaii a few years ago, you could even choose whether you want your Hawaiian cigars flavored with coconut, vanilla, or chocolate. I chose the coconut. I wasn't sure it was the right choice. But now let's talk about wine for a few minutes. We're off to Lanzarote, and Lanzarote is a beautiful wine-producing area. It's kind of barren, but the local people developed some strategies to grow a lot of cereals, a lot of fruit, and a lot of wine, in fact. And here you see these landscapes with these little shelters they built, the lageria concept it's called. And this is because there's a lot of wind. You have to shelter the plants, but you also have to anchor them in the ground, and you have to give them the right nutrition. And because of the wind, it's very dry there, but the use of volcanic particles has helped enormously. And this all goes back to the big eruption on Lanzarote 1730. And there was a nasty eruption, 1730 to 36. It covered 23% of the entire island. And, well, the villagers were not very happy. Most of them lost their livelihood. And what happened was that the Spanish crown, they sent an observer. It was a bishop at the time, and he noted that the volcanic particles on the fields, if they're not too dense, if there's just a few, will actually cause the fields to bloom. If there's a lot of it, the fields die. And what he suggested afterwards was to use this as a concept. And indeed, the people of Lanzarote use this now on wide areas of land. And this use of picon, the small little fragments as they are called locally, they actually help a lot with growing crops. And within about 50 years, the population of Lanzarote doubled and produced outstanding wines. And the famous Malvasia wine from Lanzarote was actually drank at the Vienna Congress in 1814. You can still see the menu there. This is when Napoleon was on the out and Europe was carved up again in different domains. And the people there, they enjoyed wine from Lanzarote. So what is the secret of these little volcanic particles? Well, people always say, oh, it's because the vesicles, the little bubbles in the particles, they can hold water better. And that's certainly true. So when there's heat, the water on the surface evaporates, but in the little volcanic particles, water gets caught and it stays in there. So the plants can actually have access to water. But I thought there's more to this, and we did a little study on this together with some of my students. And we looked at this. This is electron microscope images. This is super, super tiny things that we have blown up in the electron microscope. And we were shocked to find there's a lot of life in these particles. There's loads of microorganisms in there. And let me show you here. So here is a little, here's a little vesicle. Here's a bubble. And see all these little shells in there? And then when you zoom in, you find all of these creatures here. And they all... This one looks like a feather, but it's super tiny. And I needed a specialist to identify them all, but we have names for them all. You can read it on the bottom there if you're interested. And they also produce and lock up a lot of carbon in these rocks. So not only are the volcanic particles are capturing water, they also act as a form or a background for life. And the bacteria and the microorganisms, they break down the volcanic rock, and that delivers nutrients to the soil and makes it available to the plants. So this concept is becoming increasingly popular. So it helps dry areas to bloom, like here on Lanzarote. But let me show you this diagram, and I don't want to go into details here, but there is now calculations that say if we were to use this concept on a large scale, we could actually sequester a huge amount of CO2 into the soil. And there are some publications here. I just highlighted Spain, and this is actually in tons. I'll change that. So here, this is a calculation that about 25% of what Spain pledged in the Paris Agreement could actually be sequestered into soil by using volcanic particles on something like 70% of the agricultural surfaces. And this has been done for many other countries. It's less intense for the USA for some reason. I haven't looked into the details. But here we might have a very low-tech method to help with climate change. But now I'd like to move on to a few other things, a few words about geotourism. Already Charles Darwin said that volcanoes are beautiful for travels. They make beautiful landscapes. Here's a few old drawings of Tenerife. And here's an old map of Iceland, also a volcanic region. And if you look very carefully here, there you see the Hekla volcano erupting, which was believed to be the entrance to hell. And here you see all these wonderful creatures that the artist has added there to signal that the entrance to hell is surrounded by all these mystical creatures that protect the area. So there's always been a fascination of volcanic areas, and it goes back to ancient times. Here we see some images, and this is actually my nephew in the top right. I took him to La Palma a few years ago, and this is at the visitor center. But the bottom image on the left is actually from Hawaii, and you see how people flock to volcanic areas to experience this. It's not always ideal because there was the big White Island disaster in New Zealand, you might have heard. Tourists were actually on the volcano while it erupted. Bit irresponsible, I think, personally, but you shouldn't go there when the volcano is active. But when you go to places like this, Iceland here, then, well, during COVID, Iceland was almost bankrupt again, and then they switched on the volcano to get all the tourism. And they have switched it on again last summer, so it's a great source. Actually, during the last summer, the first day of the eruption had already 10,000 visitors. Can you believe it? So, and of course, they all need accommodation, they all need rental cars and things like that. So Iceland is making a ton of money from volcanoes. So here's a few impressions. You see how many people are flocking around, and these volcanoes are very harmless. They're not explosive, so you can actually stand around and watch. But, well, you shouldn't get too close, obviously, but yeah, it's very nice. So, and this concept is, of course, well, exploited all over the world. Here, an old postcard from Lassen Volcanic Park, and then Kilauea Military Camp. You have all sorts of variations, volcano tours in Indonesia, Iceland tours, etc. So wherever there's a volcano, you'll likely also find geotourism. And you can do all sorts of activities, jeep safaris, and you can do volcano surfing, things like that. So, and here's a few more impressions from the various areas around the world. So, having said this, I also would like to draw attention to Pompeii at Vesuvius, which is now a tourist site, but it's actually an archaeological site. And it's, of course, a city that got covered with volcanic material in 79 AD. So here's one of the earliest photos from 1899. You see Vesuvius in the background with its gas plume and the excavated area there. And this is an artist's impression of how the eruption might have looked like back in 79 AD. And here in the top right, you see part of an excavation where we still have the ash cover over a Roman road. And then we have learned a lot about how Romans lived because of volcanoes, because we had all of these frozen-in situations. Partly a little bit, well, yeah, spooky, I have to admit. But on the other side, the image in the lower bottom right It's effectively a fast food restaurant, a Roman fast food restaurant. I always call it a Roman McDonald's, and we wouldn't have known about this without volcanoes preserving it. So volcanoes in culture, just towards the end, a few words about that. And volcanoes are often revered. They are often believed to be associated with powerful, magical spirits. And here we have Pele, of course, the goddess of volcanoes on Hawaii. And as you all know, she is easily calmed down with gin. So, but I personally think if you give her too much, she might get angry again. It's up to, yeah, but you can try. So, and this is, of course, in various cultures, also in Europe. Vulcan, we're actually the god of fire, or Hephaestus in Greek. He lives under Etna, and he has his forge there whenever he's angry. And he hammers his metal tools, then the volcano is erupting above. And this is also ancient mythology. And in fact, it's quite perceptive. The Romans and Greeks knew that volcanoes and metals belong together. So there's a lot of knowledge already in that. So a few words about Iceland as well. People often ask, could it be that Icelandic culture has to do with volcanoes? And the answer is, I think so. You may have heard about the Edda, the old book of the Vikings. And there is the description of the Fimbul winter, the winter at the end of time before everything breaks down. And I believe it's actually modeled on a volcanic winter. So it says there in the Edda, there will be winter and the greatest frosts and keen winds will happen, and the sun will do no good. And there will be 3 of these. 3 nasty, long winters. And it continues to say, the sun will turn black and lava will sink and land will sink into the sea. The brightest star will vanish from the skies. Fire will rage forth and flames will lick the heavens itself. Boulders will slam together so big that trolls will tumble. I don't think so, but anyway. So, and this is a description of a really intense volcanic eruption. And it just happens that prior to the Edda being written, there was a big eruption, probably in 936 AD, the Elkjau fires. And there's other references in the Saxon Chronicle, for example, that says that the mountains of the north are said to have erupted in flames in many places in the years before King Heinrich died. And this was, of course, to make King Heinrich look better. And here we have evidence for a big volcanic eruption that was likely inspiring the descriptions of the Aesir gods and the end of time. But this is, of course, very common in many other cultures. This is now from Indonesia. And here you see the dancing people in the top left. And actually it says here in this newspaper clipping, Japanese villagers attempt to appease the volcano gods. I tell you, it didn't work. The volcano did erupt, but people are trying to make this part of their culture, and it's becoming part of rituals there. This is, of course, true all over the world. If you go to Mexico, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, the 2 volcanoes next to Mexico City, one is very angry, the other one is not. And Iztaccíhuatl is the gentle princess of the Aztecs, and Popocatépetl is a fearsome warrior. And the message in there is that Popocatépetl is very dangerous. Iztaccíhuatl is not. She is a calm volcano. So there is messages in these stories, and therefore they're part of this culture. And here, let me go to Japan for a second. This is Fuji, Fujiyama, the revered volcano of the Japanese people. And here is Hokusai's drawings from the 1600s. And he actually put together these drawings of Fujiyama. He had different visions of it. And he started to write little poems on this. And this was actually the start of our comics as we know them today. Mangas, as they call them in Japanese. And volcanoes have actually been the start of little comics. So if you read all sorts of comics these days, from superheroes to Donald Duck, the original concept actually was inspired by volcanoes. So, and of course, in Europe, we also had a lot of religious connotations here. From Italy, this is where people are praying that the saints will actually make the volcano stop. So there's various links to that, and you see various old paintings, religious paintings, and I'm showing two here with a volcano in the background. So various saints are approached in the hope that they calm down the volcano. And these beliefs continue to the present day, maybe not always in a religious way, but volcanic stones are often believed to have a certain energy. And in the top right here, there it says, energy and success coming from volcanoes if you buy this certain mineral and wear it as a necklace, for example. So, and of course, there's art, and volcanoes have inspired art. Going back here to 1684, this is Vesuvius volcano in Italy. And here's a little time travel. So this is 1752. Another artist was drawing the volcano, showing an eruption. Here, a little later, 1766. And then again, 1779. And then in 1787, somebody had the wonderful, smart idea to use the volcano. And this is the first recorded olive oil advertisement in the world. And of course, it's supposed to give you strength from the volcano. So this olive oil must be particularly good. One of the first photographs that we know of, 1876 or 78, is actually of a volcano, the Bay of Naples and Vesuvius volcano. And then, of course, we have all sorts of literature that allows us to explore how things go when you go to volcanoes. Jules Verne, for example, he described the journey to the center of the earth. And he was entering the earth in Snæfellsjökull, that's a volcano in Iceland. And he went all the way down to the center of the earth, and he came up at Stromboli. Of course, we know it's not quite working this way, but he realized that volcanoes are connected somewhere underground to some larger supply area in the earth mantle. And he has described it in his fictional way, but he actually had a point. So this is quite spectacular, I feel. He was quite a visionary. Now, of course, volcanoes also occur in movies. This was one of my favorite movies when I was a 6-year-old boy. And this is Krakatoa. And it was really, oh my God, I was so thrilled. I watched it several times. I watched it again a few years ago, and I was far less thrilled. And then I looked at the title again. It says Krakatoa, east of Java. Actually, I realized, oh my God, Krakatoa is west of Java. I am not so impressed anymore, but it did inspire me when I was young. Then, of course, there's all sorts of modern-day movies. You can go and you can see Dante's Peak, where they drive through lava. I don't think it works this way. Or you have a volcano where we have an eruption in Los Angeles. In the center of Los Angeles, the volcano erupts, and you can have a volcano menu to go with that. So it makes it probably very spicy. And there you see volcanoes are still an amazing inspirational concept to this day. Also in music, it's quite widely used. I came across this band. I don't think they're very good, but they're called Krakatoa. And they are depicted here as a school rock band in the upper image. And then a little later, they looked a little tougher in the lower image. And then on the right-hand side, this is a radio station from New Jersey, and it says it's real and constantly erupting. So they also use the concept of volcano. And I visited an old school friend a little while ago in Berlin, and we went out for a boys' night. And there I saw this poster here of a support band called Magma Kammer, which means magma chamber. So they're implying that their rock and roll is very energetic, I guess. And then, of course, I have 3 little daughters, and they love Vajana, as it's called in Sweden. And it's different names in different countries. But this is also about Chakar, the lava monster. And Chakar then gives rise to the Green Island. So in that concept, in that fictional concept, we also have the constructive and destructive powers of volcano encapsulated. So I'd like to quickly summarize. Volcanoes do a lot of good, believe it or not. They are not just bad. I actually think they have a wrong reputation. I think volcanoes are better than we think. They produce a lot of metals and gemstones. They allow us to produce building materials, and we use them in industry as abrasion materials, and we also get a lot of geothermal power. They are linked to food, drink, and cosmetical products, and of course, geotourism and culture is also very much linked to volcanoes. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found that useful.